Welcome to our webinar this morning on how to communicate during a cyber attack, which will be presented by Charlie. Before passing over to him, just quickly, just wanted to run over a couple of bits of housekeeping. So we're going to aim to keep to half an hour. I know we've lost a few minutes here, but we'll make up for that at the end, don't worry. And there'll also be time for some Q&A at the end. Do not fear if you drop off or need to leave early. The slides and recording and all resources will be made available to everyone and be sent around afterwards. And then finally, any questions that you have, type them into the GoToWebinar questions box on the right-hand side, and we'll pick those up at the end of the webinar. So without any further ado, over to you, Charlie.
All right, so Charlie Maclean-Bristol, I am Director of Plan B Consulting, and own background is Army, followed by Utilities, followed by Plan B. My only other claim to fame is quite involved in the writing of standards, so involved in the writing of good practice guidelines. I've written a couple of cyber courses, so I'm a non-techie cyber person, and I'm also take all this sort of exercising cyber so seriously. I've written a book on the cyber, exercising anyway there. So, right, our agenda for today is we are going to talk about, hopefully you can see the slides. And you can see the slides up there, but what we're going to do today is to talk about communications after a cyber incident. For us and for me, is that the most important thing you do in incident management communications. Yes, all the techie stuff is really important. We need to make sure that works, but in the end is how you communicate with your stakeholders and how your stakeholders perceive how they perceive you manage an incident will be the defining moment of this incident. And so, in the limited time we had, we're not going to teach you all how to be crisis communication professionals, but what I want you to do is kind of open up your mind a little bit to what don't I know, and thought, oh, actually, I haven't thought about that. I need to do something about it. So that is what we're going to be doing today. So if we move on to the next slide, and we are talking about to say that the quote by Brian Horan is about is saying that if you have a cyber attack, people I think are more understanding of cyber attacks. They know there by the grace of God go I. And so what we are doing there in this is understanding is to say, look, if we can manage this well, we can even come out with our reputation even better than we started off. So that we can make our reputation better. But if we look at firstly, the top thing, we will bankrupt ourselves in the vain hope for absolute security, then there is no such thing as 100% security. There's always the possibility you're going to have a cyber attack. Even the NSA and the American government, who got billions, millions of dollars to spend on cybersecurity, they can hack an incident. They can be hacked. And we also need to have a think through around about what are we dealing with. So that's the 4 quarters there. So first of all, we need to think about the continuity of reputational managers is where the incident is won or lost there. So we need to think about that. The IT technical response is for the IT people to do. The continuity of operations, I think it's important we talk to our stakeholders about making sure that we continue service. So that's important communications. And then we have our statutory communications, which it's going to be serious if we do not meet our regulatory requirements there. So that is what I say is the scope. The first thing is we need to do is to understand what are the sort of different types of attacks. And I still find with this sort of ransomware bit that people are not really quite understanding what is the anatomy of a ransomware attack. So this is what the attack is. First, they gain access to our system. So phishing, spear phishing, social engineering, then they gain access to that. And I'm sure you've done all your phishing emails and all that sort of stuff to stop people come in there. The next thing is then they identify valuable data. So they know what data they are looking for. They're looking for the personal, the personal identifying information, they're looking for trade secrets, they're looking for anything that embarrassing the organization, they're looking for your sort of crown jewels there. And they are good, done by professionals, and they are good at extracting data. And you can see my little diagram there, 94% of attacks exfiltrate data. So you can pretty much be sure that if you have a serious ransomware attack, the data is gone. Now, we've seen lots of organizations like Capita, Arnold Clark, who say, we don't believe they got data. And then 2 weeks later, the newspapers have broken to say, yes, they have lost data. So I think you have to be if you're looking at a ransomware attack, you have to be clear on to say it's probably almost likely you've lost some data, could be less, could be more, but that's gone. So you need to be getting your head around to say, actually, you can say we believe we haven't lost data, we don't know we lost data, but you're being a bit mealy-mouthed with that. I think you have to say, there is a possibility of lost data. We're investigating. We don't know what that data may be, but we're kind of warning you there. So identify vulnerability. They will encrypt your files and backups. Now, sometimes we're doing attacks, we're just taking the data out. Sometimes we're doing the encrypting files as well. So they're going to encrypt your files and their backups, anything attached to the system. So what you're needing to do is go back to air-gapped backups, and then you can make sure that the bad guys can't get your backups. And the better your backups, the more air-gapped your backups, the better chance you have of recovering and not having to pay. They will also often try and get your Active Directory, so you physically can't log on at all to any of your systems because they've got your Active Directory. So you have to think in terms of communications. How are you going to communicate if you haven't got anything to communicate on because you can't get onto your Microsoft 365 or your Google or whatever else systems you use for your communications because you can't get onto them. Sometimes it's done at the most inconvenient times. So we like TravelX was done on New Year's Eve, Scottish Environmental Protection Agency done was Christmas Eve. So they don't do every single attack on holidays, but it can be done in inconvenient times. And then your ransom is the threat to lease your sensitive data. For me, that is, I think, is a lot of people are paying, especially if you have really sensitive data. You pay because you think, actually, I don't want my client's data out there. You pay for the key for the encrypted data, and some organization, if they get all your data, you really, you could start trying to recreate that data, but it is also the encrypted data. You lose all your data, you don't really have a business there. And there was a webinar about the transport company Knights of Old, and they went bankrupt. They were, on the edge financially, but the cyber attack was enough to push them over. But they had all their financial files encrypted, so they had difficulty raising money. And also when they wanted to try and borrow money to kind of to try and get themselves back up and going, they weren't able to produce their financial statements, and they weren't able to produce financial statements, so no one would lend them any money. And they went bankrupt, lost 600 jobs. Just so you know, you pay for the encrypted key to the encrypted data. Just note from communications bit is they might approach your customers, individual partners, and they might do threatening calls to you to try and put pressure on you to do them. So just be aware of that. You might want to communicate that to your partners or your staff to say you may see a threatening email. And the triple extortion is, or the quadruple extortion is, the threatened DDoS attacks as well. So that is a tried and tested model. But my takeaway from this is, or takeaway to you is to say, think about that data that's exfiltrated and think about how in communications terms you're going to deal with that. So that's the quadruple. That's the other attacks, and I think just mention some other attacks. So you need to think about, if this happened, how would you deal with it? So DDoS attacks is when they fire lots of. It's like when people try and buy Oasis tickets, and sometimes the system collapses because there's so many people trying to get there. So DDoS attacks are the same thing, and they can take down your system and damage them. So if you've got a DDoS attack in your system, maybe it's not taking out your whole IT, but specific systems, how would that deal with it? So that's DDoS attack. I think there's a really key bit in dealing with your supply chain, because what if it's your partner, your managed service partner, a close partner of yours, which has the incident? So they may sit behind your organization, but they have, your clients don't have visibility of them, and how do they have attacks? So we're looking at CTS. That was the lawyers company in 2023, which managed all the whole load of lawyers. I think it's about 80 lawyers case studies, not case studies, documents which were needed for court cases, conveyancing. They had a cyber attack, locked out all their systems, and the lawyers couldn't do their conveyancing. It was also towards Christmas. They couldn't do their conveyancing because another company had, which they used to manage their files, had locked them up. So in communication terms, do think about how you're going to manage an incident that affects your suppliers, but it's, you are the front up of that service. And if we look at the in Beta and Ticketmaster, so this was in 2018. And what happened there is Ticketmaster had about 40,000 of their account details taken, but they blamed Beta because they were their IT provider. Beta then turned around and say, you put a chatbot, which we told you not to, without us knowing, on our system, and actually it was your chatbot that got hacked. So it wasn't our fault, it was your fault. And that's the MSP, but this was played out fairly well in the sort of media, the places there. So you need to think through how you're going to deal with your customers. And I think you almost need to have protocols with your supplier and say, if you have a cyber attack, how are we going to manage together? Have a public spat, maybe everyone loves looking at it, but it doesn't do good for both organizations. So you need to be tight in your comms. What goes on behind the closed doors might be different, but a united front is fairly important. Credential stuffing is where people get into your portals or get into their online accounts. Now, multi-factor authentication has been taken that out, so a lot less it's happening again. But Deliveroo there was highly criticized because people were getting into their takeaway accounts, and then people were getting in, taking takeaways, and then Deliveroo they were saying, oh, I didn't order that takeaway from Deliveroo. and then Deliveroo had to cough up the money for it, and it was embarrassing for their customers, and that's where multi-factor authentication came in. But if you do have a portal that people can get into, and this is because of people were reusing passwords, then think about, if there's people been doing things for your customers on the portal, how you're going to deal with that. Those target attacks, the Bangladesh bank account and Sony, were nation state targeted attacks. So if you get attacked by a nation state, I would say do your threat intelligence in your response so you can understand who's attacking. But if you got attacked by a nation state, you might want to think about how that plays in your communications and also how you're going to respond. Payment diversion fraud, I suspect, is something that is kept quite quiet. People don't like to admit it, but it is where there is a man person in the middle between emails, and basically you're just about to pay a suppliers and you see an email from a trusted person with the same voice, same tone, the same email address, maybe slightly different, which says, oh, can you just put it in a number 2 bank account because that's the way we're doing these payments in there. You think nothing of, send the money. They say, where's my money? And you say, I've sent it to you. And there's loss of money there. But we did have a client who had this happen to them, and the lady there had to ring up every single person, this finance person, every email and say there's a possibility of bad guys seeing this email. And she said she spent 3 weeks on the phone phoning every single person, and she said it was just excruciatingly awful. So you get payment diversion fraud, you need to think about how you're going to deal with the comms bit. And last but not least, on the right there, theft of IP. So if someone's stolen your IP, Twitch had their source code, Lockheed Martin had their stealth fighter details taken. So you need to think about how in comms term. So those are some of the most typical attacks. And always for a constable, say, how are you going to respond? What are your lines to take? How do you see yourself dealing with that? So let's just move on to just your stakeholders. So who do you need to inform? I think for cyber, you should have in your business continuity plans, your crisis management team, a robust list of stakeholders. I think you need the same thing for your cyber plan. But I think with that, you also need to think through what data you held for them. So that if you have look at your internal staff database, or you look at your customer relationship management system, what data do you actually hold on your stakeholders? What detail do you hold? Passport numbers? Do you not hold passport numbers? You think, why do I hold passports? But every single time you go for a job, you've got to show your passport, your right to work in the country. So what data do you hold? I think so moving on with that, partners and APIs. So what APIs, connections do you have in and out of your system? IT systems, because lots of people have data flows. So, are you going to cut off all your data flows, and then you need to actually tell the people whose data flows you just cut off how you're going to you've done that, so that they know that. And often if they hear that you've had a cyber attack, they will cut off the data flows anyway. Just one bit there is, I talked about differently communicating. Sometimes if a partner has an API, what they'll do is block your email addresses, so you can't actually correspond with the partner, because the fact is that because your emails are not going to get through, so they're blacklisted there. So talk to your partners, think about what data you hold. And I think it is I don't know if it's too cynical to even think about think about having a communications plan. If you have lost all the information in your organization, which could possibly go, how would you contact? Do you have the collateral to be able to contact all those different people to be able to manage that incident there? So you need to think about that data, and you do. Now that's quite a big job, but I think it will pay dividends on the day, so you can have very clear of what is the worst case, and if you can very quickly, your IT people do their magic to tell you which ones are going out there, then you can put that out there. So think about who you need to inform there. If we move on to instant configuration here, just a couple of things from a sort of comms point of view and a general point of view. Often people have a crisis management team, which you can see on the right there, and they have a sort of IT cyber team, and they might have a sort of cyber incident management response plan. And often we see these things don't tie together. So you've got a cyber incident response plan, which is almost like a mini crisis plan, but you don't use the elements already of the crisis plan and then just layer on. To me, it says you need to have a crisis plan, and then you should have a contingency plan, which deals with the strategic, the reputational bit. There's a techie plan as well. The reputational bit of your crisis management plan, and the two work together. So in a cyber incident, these are the things you need to think about there. In addition, but we use our standard response from our crisis management plan there. Too often I've seen, and I was doing an exercise with somebody yesterday where they had, they didn't also have any reference to their business continuity, because you need to, in a cyber incident, you need continuity of operations. So with the reference to your business continuity plan, your manual workarounds, because that's going to be key there. Is the cross-reference to your I team and your computer incident response team, your technical response? So I think, just if you're looking at your sort of communications, if you're looking at incident management, you need to look holistically as a whole and just make sure all the different bits fit together, and you don't have kind of two or three, crisis plan, crisis incident management plan, a CERT kind of computer incident management response team, and they're not all sort of gathered close together. They're in different bits. So have a look at the whole and make sure they're managed together. Make sure you put in your third parties, make sure you put technical response, and make sure you cross-reference your business continuity plans there. In terms of communication tasks, communications for me, in looking at this in cyber incident management, is no real difference to normal cyber incident management. So it's the same thing. You've just got the cyber. The difficulty you might have is you don't have access to your systems. You might not have your communication tools. We'll come on to that in a second. You might not have access to them, and so all the communication is going to be much different. Just I'll very quickly go through the task there. We always see in incident response that people have far too few people doing the communications role. Yes, you might have a communications team of one or two, and yes, you might have the person on the crisis management team, but they need a staff of people doing other stuff for them. So, so you've got your crisis management team member who sits in the crisis team, but you need a liaison person to go run back and forward to this staff of people, and they don't need to be all communication professionals. Quite a lot of these jobs can be done by, media monitoring can be done by a lay person. It doesn't need to be anyone with communication skills, but they need to be looking, is there any TV? Is there any TV coming out there? Is there any press coming out there? You monitor the social media. You don't need a huge skilled person to say there's nothing on the press on our incident. So you need a crisis team liaison, you need someone to develop internal communications, updating the website. Just a point on websites is, if you look at a lot of cyber incidents, people don't release information on, fair dues, but often newspapers or website will cut and paste anything you put on the website about the incident. So if you can, I was going to spin a good story, tell a good story about what is happening in this incident, then you can put it on the website, and the media will take it off the website. So just tell a good story there. Your social media, so someone dealing with your media and social media. And just that whole point is about, just because you aren't on social media doesn't mean your incident's talked about. You might liaise with technical specialists. So if there is, some harm that your product can do, then you'll need to communicate that. You'll need to communicate what data has been lost. So you need to have people who can maybe reach back into the organization, find out information there. Someone reviewing the comms effectiveness. If you ask people to take up credit monitoring, are people doing it or are people not? And if they're not doing it, obviously your comms not getting through there. Preparing your spokespersons. So if you're going to have a spokesperson there, they need to be prepared to go on TV. So I think there's a lot of jobs there. And I think in your crisis communication plans there, pre-written statements, it isn't really very different to a normal generic comms plan. But I think you just need to have a think through, say, what elements are different in cyber, what's your tone, so how you're going to deal with those. Just keep an eye on the time there because I'm running over now. Let's go on to inform or not. And when looking at inform or not, remember, Information Commission Officer got 72 hours. You need to be aware of all your own regulators of how quick they need to be told. And my gut feel from regulators is they like to be told sooner rather than later. So, 72 hours is your last time. You can see that with Equifax, is that before rules came in America, this was 2017, they took 41 days to announce they had a cyber incident. So lots of time to organize themselves. You're going to have a lot tighter. Maybe you need to do within sort of 24 hours when you first know what's happening. So you need to be informing regulators fairly quickly. And if anyone can come to harm from your cyber incident, you're morally obliged to tell them. And the longer you don't tell them, the longer the bad guys they've got their data now, the longer the bad guys have got to kind of to take out loans to their name, buy houses in their name. So all that kind of fraud that happen. So you've got to tell people, you have a moral obligation to tell people earlier there. Just in terms of, there's a long list there of how to inform people. Just notice this thing, the idea of dark websites. Dark websites are where you have a drop down on your dev site. So if you need to be very sort of blatant and tell people that there's an incident, you can have that drop down bit, which I suspect is a click on the British Airways website, and then you can put some information on the incident. If you've got a very fancy integrated website, you really need to do this in advance so you have the ability to put in information on your website. And you might want to do it a banner on the front page to alert everybody to it, because that's sort of instant it is. So you have that drop down list there. Just in terms of announcements and informing people, there's lots and lots of different ways you can do it. So you just think through your channels of how to do some. So either using your social media, using your website, using emails, using letters, using call centers. Maybe you set up a call center, maybe set a self-service portal, maybe you have a CEO internal. So, and some of those things you might want to write in advance, if you want to write maybe a positioning piece on how good was your cyber security beforehand, then you can write that positioning piece in front of them. So you need to be informing them. So you need to have a long list and to be think through. Well, the last slide I want to come on to is just the messaging. So do you describe as a victim? Are you a victim of wicked international cyber criminals, or are you a villain because you've actually had an attack? So how do you position yourself in terms of that? I do think, I said that thing of there's less blame culture round about here, but in the end, I think if you have a cyber attack and everyone knows about it, then you'll always be seen slightly tainted by it. You might be able to move on, but I think you're going to be tainted by it. A key strategy is I put open or close or open or hidden is your strategy of how much you're going to tell people. Are you going to stick notice on the front of your website because actually what you've lost could harm to your customers, and you need to inform them, you need to inform the world that you're not providing the service, and you need to give lots of information, or as many organizations are doing at the moment, is they're trying to keep this quite hidden. So they might inform all the relevant people, they might have emails out or systems out there, might conversations, but actually the bit that they've had a cyber, the information is buried deep in their website, could be in their news section. So if you know they've had an incident, you can find it. But if you're not looking for it, you wouldn't find it. So you need to think through that sort of, are you going to do a more overt strategy or a covert strategy? You need to form this balance between support and informing. So who do you need to inform of the threat and what has happened? Do your stakeholders need to check whether they're affected? So do they phone up you, or do you inform them, or do you inform them in the media? So how do people know whether they're affected by the data breach or not? Especially if you can have a lot of, if you're a business to B2C, then lots of customers there. Do you need them to take action there? Do you need them to keep an eye on their account? Do you need them to take up credit monitoring? So what actions do you need them to do to protect themselves? And what are you going to do to support them? So are you going to give them credit monitoring? Are you going to do anything else? And also, why did this happen? And what are you going to do to make sure it not happened again? But also, if you are a sales organization, you need to, your partners, your customers need to, you need to keep confidence in the organization, reassure stakeholders. So, if you're British Airways, say, you need to keep selling flights. So you have to keep the, you have to keep the business going. So you might have a big banner saying, and we've had a cyber breach, and then you have to say, please book with us. And that may be the reality. So how do you keep open the business? How do you try and minimize disruption? How do you do the manual workarounds so that you can keep your customers doing? How do you limit your brand impact and keep trading, attracting new customers? There's a delicate balance, to be done there, and so that you can balance between the two. So that is my talk today. I've cantered through it a little bit there. So is there any questions? Andy, is there any questions there?
Yes, one question that we have here, Charlie. You've previously discussed having messages ready for using in incidents. Do you recommend a comms plan with all communications ready to send out, covering most eventualities?
Yeah, I think there's about it's slightly difficult here because predetermined commutations are great because you can sign them off, but then the more detailed they are, the more they might not fit the incident. Less detailed they are, they end up so bland that you could write them in 2 minutes, and so there. But I do think if you need to think about some of the, I think you should be thinking about, if you're going to lose personal protected data, what guidance are you going to give to your customers on how to protect themselves? That is something you could write now, and then you could send that to staff, and then you could send that to all those whose data you lost and say, look, this is how we suggest you you deal with this. We can't get your data back, but these are the precautions you can take to prevent yourselves become a victim of identity fraud. You can maybe write a piece around about what was the level of cybersecurity planning, and so we invested £10 million in the last 5 years. We did this. We had this audit, 27,001. We had Cyber Essentials Plus. We'd done all kind of reasonable precautions. We had the auditors in, once every 3 years, got clean bill of health. I think those are the things you can write, because trying to write them and do the research under pressure is going to be difficult. So, I think those are the things that you need to do to do that. So there's about the balance there, but I think predetermined communications is a very good idea.
Brilliant. Another question here. How often should you test the cyber response plan as a specific threat module within your integrated CMP communications team to ensure all elements, in particular third parties, are kept appraised of the incident?
I think what you need to do, and I think there's two things here. I think your crisis management response, that whole kind of response need to be tested at least once a year, and maybe I've written a book on those short exercises, but do a short exercise for an hour, 45 minutes in between. I do think what you should be doing with comms is having separate comms exercises, because often we see this all the time in exercises. They do the big bang crisis management exercise and fine, and they deal with it, but they get 3 hours. Often there is never time to write the communications, and there's very rarely time to do the feedback loop of your written communications. This is how the media, social media, regulator, anybody else has responded. So how do you need to respond to their response? There isn't normally time to do that in an exercise because there's so much other, especially cyber exercise, so much other stuff going on. So what I suggest is to do separate communications exercises where you get your comms together and you just focus on, you could even use the same scenarios you use for the big exercise. Say, right, let's just work through the comms here. Let's write some of the comms. Let's think about the comms. Let's think about what guidance we can do for the crisis management team. Let's do some feedback loop on this is what they're, and concentrate on the comms on alone. I don't think often, I haven't seen a lot of comms teams do it. They trundle along to the exercise and they're busy people, comms is an ongoing job. But I do think comms should take some time out to exercise their response and really think through how they're going to deal with it, because there's an awful lot to deal with.
Brilliant. Next question. In the event of a cyber attack, most businesses pull the plug immediately, so all staff lose access to everything. From your experience, how long does it normally take to return to BAU?
Well, I was just doing some research on that just before I started there. It is days, weeks, and for some organization, for business as normal, it's years. If you look at some of the CIPA attacks, some of the Hackney Council attacks, these echoes of these attacks go on for days, months, and possibly years. So yes, you get the sort of bulk of your key systems up sort of days fairly quickly, but then there is a long tail. And people like SEPA, my understanding is they had to recreate their whole financial management system back from bank statements. That is long, laborious, and very time consuming. And that's what you might have to do. So I think you need to be prepared for the dig in for the long, we were having a discussion yesterday, and the IT guys saying, "Oh, the best thing we get, but all the systems back within 4 hours." In Scottish term, aye, right. But maybe not. I'm not a technical person. Maybe a person can do it, but I think you need to make sure you're in for the long term, and also you've got some alternative means of communications. You can use your mass notification systems to tell people, and they can sit outside your systems. But after that, I think you very quickly need to set up either a shadow email. If you're Microsoft, you get a Google email address, and some people do have that in place, so they can deploy very rapidly, say Google Mail, and you can at least get people communicating. But do think about how you communicate with no communications.
Brilliant. And just one last final question, Charlie, just to wrap things up. Someone's commented here that they find that comms staff are sometimes reluctant to prepare statements in advance. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I can understand for the reasons they're so bland, they're not worth it. But I do think if you have some set piece things you're going to have to write, like, how do you protect? What guidance do you give to protect after a cyber attack to your staff or externals, or things like, how well will we prepare for attack? That takes time and effort, research, and let's do the research now rather than later. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Charlie. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today on the webinar. We'll wrap things up now. We will be sending the slides and recording as promised afterwards. And thank you for bearing with us at the start of the webinar as well. And we'll catch you on our next webinar. Thanks very much, everyone.
Yes, okay.